So how did you become a non-feminist woman?
Well, there were several things I believe were the driving force
Mm-hmm.
for me to turn against feminism.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in my late teenage years, to probably my mid 20s, I subscribed to some feminist ideas. Not all of them, and I was never a rabid feminist or militant in any way. Um, but I would say, firstly, life experience and wisdom woke me up to the ideas. When you're a young person, you believe you know everything, and nobody can tell you anything,
Mm-hmm.
anything. And you kind of have to go out into the world and live life, and you have to see things happen in your own life and the lives of others. And then I saw the damage of feminism within my own life and people around me.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that our ancestors um, put certain precautions in place for our protection.
Mm-hmm.
They saw what could happen to a young woman
Mm-hmm.
that is going off on her own and trying to do things, without her family's protection, without the wisdom of the elders. I was 19 years old and I was dating
Mm-hmm.
instead of courting for marriage or trying to find a husband, and I fell pregnant. And because of that, I was thrust out into the workplace and I had to try to work and support a child by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And being a single parent is one of the hardest things that you'll ever take on in your life. And I feel, if I hadn't fallen for those feminist ideas, I would have known better. I wouldn't have gone off and I was dating for fun rather than finding a husband.
Yeah.
And that same thing happened to several of my friends.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So
A lot of the
just
times we glorify being single, but we don't talk about how difficult it can be. Yeah.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, especially in today's society. I mean, I've never been a single mom, so I don't know, I don't have much experience with that, but I can say even just being single in today's society where everything is so disconnected, we kind of need each other just to have an emotional support and to always have somebody. And I think in this society, we can be prone to be lonely and thing, and everybody sort of glorifies this, oh, be strong and single. It's okay to be single. Now, it is okay to be single, but we can also speak about the side of it where we need each other, we need this companionship, we need, and then on top of that, if you add children to the mix, then I think it becomes even worse, of course, because then you need not just emotional support, but you need this mental support of dealing with children, you need the support of, somebody being there. But some people have family, so it
Yeah.
depends on the person, of course. But yes, go ahead. So,
Yeah. So it was just
mhm.
the combination, I think, of age and what I had seen around me. Everything that had been taught
Mhm.
to me, living in the West, in the education system, and then in the media and Hollywood. They're all showing these women just going off and doing their own thing, but they don't talk about the consequences
Mhm.
of that. And I had to live that to
Right.
see that that was a
I
falsehood.
agree. I think women and men are not being warned about the consequences of alone, and women are not being warned about the consequences of not taking, let's say, marriage and companionship seriously. But okay, that's my personal opinion as well. But
Mhm.
yeah. So, do you believe that we live in a patriarchy in the West?
I don't believe we do in the West. I believe, in some parts of the world
Mm-hmm.
that is a
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
I believe maybe what women are talking about when they say patriarchy, maybe they don't quite understand what patriarchy actually means.
Mm-hmm.
In the West, anyway, women have the same opportunities for jobs, the same opportunities for education.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in some ways, it appears that they that they might have special privileges now. You
Right.
know, I think what we're seeing, there are more male CEOs, more male millionaires and billionaires. I think that's just the difference between the sexes. Men are more competitive than women are.
Mm-hmm.
They are less agreeable than women are. As the human species, both males and females have testosterone and estrogen, and men have a higher amount of testosterone, and it makes them fiercely compete for the best of the best. And that's, I think, historically shaped by the gender roles that we've had. They were the protectors and the providers. And so they're still being driven by, these bodies that have been shaped over tens of thousands of years.
And psychology as well, because we possibly have different psychological instincts. It can be that women and men have different instincts. We can't be completely sure, but I would wager, yes, that if for hundreds of thousands of years we develop different body parts in order to deal with different things, maybe some of our psychological instincts are slightly different as well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, if you take into account the precautions that our ancestors put into place, historically, we had arranged marriages, we had chaperones, and we were courting instead of dating. Women were thought of as special, to be protected, because the cost of a child on a woman is so great. Our ancestors saw that women maybe were being left to take care of children alone, so they wanted the women under the house to be kept and protected. And we've it's taken hundreds of years, but we've walked away from that ideal, at least in the West. We historically, that was the case. Women were not out working. Women were not going to school. And maybe it was right, maybe it was wrong, but it was something that our ancestors
I don't
did.
think we can judge it because this happened so long ago. We don't know exactly all of the inputs. And I think for the time, it would have been correct because they didn't have birth control. They didn't have the means. They knew that woman was going to get pregnant as soon as she reached fertile age. So, yes, they created a society that worked with that reality. And they created protections and systems within the society like marriage and stuff that worked with that reality. She was going to become an adult. She was going to get pregnant. So they said, okay, we'll make sure that by the time she's an adult, she's married within a relationship that protects her from harm from other strange men. Then we will make sure that... And so therefore, they were not educated in the same way as men were because they knew that the reality of that woman would be that she would be at home with children, which I think for the time made sense,
Yeah.
Now, okay, we see that there's a lot of diversity and we have options which are mostly brought to us by science, by the fact that we have birth control and safe water. Safe water is a big deal. We had to breastfeed. In the past, you couldn't give your child the same water that an adult. You had to breastfeed. So you were there for 3 years attached to a child.
Yes.
Things have changed. So what are your thoughts on traditional gender roles?
Well, I think they're just the lingering, it has to do with humans historically. What is our anatomy? How have we evolved as a species? One thing that makes us unique as a species on this planet, different from every other life form on this planet, is our brains. The size of our brains, and because of their complexity and because of their size, it takes 25 years to technically mature. At 25 years, our frontal lobe is finally mature and our cranial plates fuse together. So because it takes so long, children are very expensive for parents, very expensive. I mean, for the first 5 years, we are nearly entirely dependent on our parents for everything, for food, for protection. The children would run off into the today. Still, run off into the street if you don't take their hand. It's very burdensome, and it's a lot of time and resources. So I think our traditional gender roles are just evidence of that. Because children require so much, it makes sense for one parent to go out and protect and provide, and one parent to be home, feeding, loving, caring.
I agree.
For one parent to do it all.
Children need someone close to them. And I think in this whole debate where, women and men can both work and stuff like this, and no one is acknowledging that our psychology is actually built around being close to a human. That's a major part of human psychology. And what happens when we take that away? We don't know. Because it is actually a major part of our psychology, attachment to someone. I mean, whether it's,
Well, I worked in a daycare.
Yeah.
And I can tell you firsthand, children are not meant to compete with 20 other children for the attention of one caregiver. You see behaviors. I had never seen such behavior. These children are aggressive and out of control, and the literacy rates and creativity are falling. And I think that's due to being in a daycare rather than, at home with one parent. And I would even concede that the father might even be home with the children while the mother works. But I think
it doesn't matter. I agree. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. The point is that for hundreds of thousands of years, our instincts and psychology or whatever is developed around spending the first few years close to another human being, getting a certain amount of individualized attention, which we are now saying doesn't really matter. It's it doesn't matter because apparently money matters more, and we don't want to depend on men because all men are pigs. He's going to leave you for a 19-year-old. So, whatever, right? And then it's okay, not everyone has to have kids. So I understand this argument when you don't have kids. But for the people who are going to have kids, they're going to need some sort of relationship where they have support, or, something has to be put in place where children can get access to an adult who cares about them, who would be a parent to them, but somehow this is totally forgotten in the discussion about what society is going to do, and in the feminist discourse So what are your thoughts on men's rights activists?
Well, while I believe that in this day and age where men have been heavily attacked by feminists, like the Me Too movement and other similar movements, ultimately, men need protection. But I do think the focus should be on what is our experience as a species? What is our experience, all together? We're male and female, but we're all human.
Yeah.
How do we come together to be united again?
Right.
I wonder where we're going to head up if we have all of these groups and everybody's fighting. How can things get better if we're not united?
Right. Where are the men and women who just want to work together? Who don't want feminism, or there's just they want to have some sort of something together where we're going to be considerate of you men, and y'all are going to be considerate of women, and we can both talk about our problems and figure out a way forward. It doesn't have to be exclusionary. It has to be some sort of thing that is together, that acknowledges that everybody exists and so on. Feminism is terrible that they leave out men. But I don't know if hitting back, maybe they have to hit back, but I don't know if it is, healthy.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody is, very reactive these days, and not the most self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing that I see when I bring up facts, and maybe they're not pleasant to men, or maybe they're not pleasant to women,
Mm-hmm.
nobody likes to hear it. And I'm like, well, to be truthful, I've seen an overall decline in people in general in the West. Everybody is so self-absorbed and materialistic,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody is doing their duty.
Mm-hmm.
Women are running off and not wanting to have children or be wives, and men don't want to be providers or protectors anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an honest criticism. Maybe that life isn't for everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
that's an honest criticism of modern day people in the West.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wish they could get back to families and
Yeah.
traditional
But
values.
it's like, okay, now we have a choice, and a lot of people are saying, no, we don't want children. We don't want that. And I suppose that is fair if that is the choice, But they would also have to hopefully acknowledge that that would not be the entire population. There are always going to be people within the population who say, you know what, I want to have kids. I do. And of course, there's not only one way to have kids, okay, but we can acknowledge that a lot of the systems that were in place because people had to have kids, and because they made things easier for that specific group of people who were having kids, you know? Okay, so what are your thoughts on intersectionality?
Well, I mean, I think that's another thing that's a little bit divisive. We're counting our differences, and we're counting our victim points rather than where we want to be. Coming from a point where one could say that I had a hard beginning to my life.
Mm-hmm.
My growing up, I had very abusive parents.
Mm-hmm.
And one could say that I started back miles behind my peers in a race in this life.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't focus on, I didn't focus on where I started. I focused on where I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because of my growing up and because of the abuse, it made me sort of vulnerable to abusive men. That was who I had my child with, was an abusive man.
Mm-hmm.
And I was homeless for a while, living in my car.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of feeling sorry for myself and counting my victimhood, I focused on going to school, finishing my education. So now I have a college degree, and I provide, for my children wonderfully. So I don't. Instead of dividing ourselves, I think we should just focus on bettering our lives, and focusing on where we want to be. If we dwell on things that make us marginalized or oppressed,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to make as much progress as if we focus on where we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
I could have stopped. I could have given up and decided, well, I'm just going to be homeless. I'm going to live in poverty my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I decided that wasn't enough for me. And we can work together if we see something that's wrong in society. If we see somebody that's being hurt, we can lift them up. But I don't think we should divide ourselves. I don't think that helps.
Right. And it certainly doesn't help discourse in everyday life when people are walking around in the internet or so and saying, you're privileged, you're not, and blah, blah, blah. I don't think it helps anything. I don't see how this helps, but okay. What is your take on hypergamy? Do you think women marry up or choose men who have social status and money and power? Or so is this important for women?
I mean, I think that would make sense from an anthropological standpoint. I think both sexes would choose the best possible mate possible. For evolutionary reasons, men would want a young, fertile woman. Mm-hmm. Because studies have shown that, for example, in women, fertility actually starts to decline by 27 and not 35 like we had previously thought. So youth would be beneficial to a man to find in a woman. For a woman, because women have been so limited by being the primary caregivers for children over tens of thousands of years, she would want a man that has status, a physically strong man to be a protector, and a man that has resources. That would make sense. Why would you want to put yourself into a valuable or a vulnerable, position with a man that can't provide for you, and then you have to go out and help collect the resources, leaving the children vulnerable? I think it makes sense. Studies have also been done on DNA, and almost all women throughout history have passed on their DNA, whereas only a handful of men have passed down their DNA. So that shows us that humans throughout history lived more like in a tribe setting, where there might be one man and many wives. And then studies have also shown that women actually find a man more attractive once he is already in a relationship with somebody else. That's kind of hard to hear, but that's reality. But I think both men and women will find the best possible mate that they can within their, within their realm.
And what do you think about gynocentrism? Do you think the world is centered around women? Do you think life is easier on women? Do you think humans have mental biases that make them more sympathetic towards women?
I believe so, and I think that is because of the woman's historical role in before birth control anyway. Women didn't really have the choice to have children, and that was their role. Historically, men have gone off to war. Women now are allowed to, but they're still not put into the deadliest position on the battlefield, if you will. Women are still, they're not working the dangerous jobs. They're still not going off to war in the same numbers, at least. And during a catastrophe, very famously, the sinking of the Titanic, the women and the children were put into the boats. The men stayed behind. And that was because women were, as well as the children, were seen as the future because of the life that they could bring into the world, because of their role, nurturing the children. So I think, in some ways, women have had it easier. And I don't think they choose to acknowledge it. There are pros and cons to being both a man and a woman, but historically, men were seen as disposable. They went off to war, they died, while the women got to stay back. The women will complain, well, all I've ever been seen as is a birth giver, just a housewife. Well, if that's the worst thing that can happen to you, that's
pretty good.
That's not so.
It's not so bad compared to what men have been seen as. Okay. What are your thoughts on being called a pick-me girl for your opinions?
Well, I've definitely been called that, and I've been told that I have internalized misogyny.
Or extreme privilege because you've never, you're privileged because you've apparently never been hurt. So they say.
But the thing is, these people, they say it out of ignorance, and I think they say it out of, reactivity. Maybe, when you know that you're speaking the truth, you don't really become offended. You don't really react emotionally. When they say these things to me, they're reacting very emotionally, but I go throughout my day unfazed because, this is how I've been my whole life, As soon as I find something that's science-based or fact-based, I investigate it and I change my views as necessary. My alliance or allegiance has always been to the science, to the facts. So I don't get offended if they call me names and then, in my age, I mean, I just don't care. I just say the truth as I see it. I'm not bothered by them.
Right. Okay. What general views would you like to share with YouTube about feminism? Like, just if you speak from the heart about feminism, what would you say to?
Well, I would tell people that if you research, the history of humanity, how have we lived for tens of thousands of years? How might our anatomy shape our behavior, and vice versa? If you research anthropological truths about humans, it will probably provide a lot of clarity within your own life and give you great direction. You shouldn't fall for whatever's trendy in how to live, but what would provide the most value in your life, what would provide the most direction. And as soon as you kind of think about how our ancestors did things, why they did certain things, it'll make sense. That would be like a piece of advice I would pass on,
Yeah. Okay. Let me see what else. Do you have any thoughts on male reproductive rights? Should men have reproductive rights or?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I guess there have been a couple topics about men's reproductive rights. First of all, the first one is, should they be able to waive child support if women have access to abortion? And I would say, that's kind of a difficult one.
Yeah,
Like,
because it's terrible for the
leave
child.
that up to individual places to make that decision. And that's simply because there have been a lot of women that have become pregnant on purpose to get child support. They were motivated by the wrong reasons, so men should have access to that too. I know that's kind of in the early stages. They should have just as many rights as women do, in my opinion.
So, are you religious?
I would say I'm an atheist, and I have been since I was in my late teenage years. But I still bring my children to church. They don't know that I'm an atheist. I take them to church and I raise them with religion, because while we made this progress forward, we didn't really put any morality in its place. We decided that religion wasn't true, it wasn't necessary, but I want my children to get traditional values, and as an atheist, there's no place to go.
I agree. You are culturally Christian. Someone told me that, and I had to agree with them. Yes. There is no place for atheists to go to get this type of moral instilling. And for our generation, we got it from the church because our parents were religious. But we grew up in the age of probably a little bit more information and then the internet and stuff. So sure, we turned out to be not religious, to be atheists. But at the same time, if you respect, as how you put it, if you respect the culture that our ancestors created and were a part of, you can respect the knowledge. And Christianity and religion is just a window into that knowledge. So not everything will be applicable, not everything came from the same place, but it will tell you some of the rules that worked. It'll have some of the messages that worked, and it'll have some of the direction to say, this is not okay, this is okay, this is, there. And you see, because we're not always going to know how to act in society and so on. So some sort of guidance is helpful. And now, with the internet being our religion, with the internet being our Bible, we are turning to the internet for information about how to live. And that's what our children have. They have the Bible of Google, right? And it's extremely chaotic and very difficult to find answers. And of course, there's some good in that, because the truth is there are no clear answers. But some sort of guidance, especially the type that we grew up with, was helpful in my life. I just did the normal traditional thing. I got married, had kids. I didn't, fight the culture. And I feel like it turned out okay, you know? Um, and I think it's not bad to have that type of guidance.
Right. Yeah. Especially, in this day and age where so many people are so misguided from what they find on the internet, I'm thinking, you know, from about my grandchildren. That's how far ahead I'm thinking. I want my children to find a quality spouse, and for that spouse to have values, and that I'm trying to think ahead, and that's part of the reason that I have my children going to church and many
Right.
volunteer
I
community
really,
activities.
I really hope and believe that the idea of like cultural Christianity becomes a thing, because I know that in the future people are going to reject religion, which they are doing, of course, in some ways, because it's very hard to believe like stories from the Bible, Noah and the Ark and stuff. It's just a culture. But I hope that some people come together and say, okay, maybe this is all just a story, but it's a culture, and there's value in the beliefs, whether it's true or not, whether you believe in this story or that story, or whether you believe in God or not, whether you believe in anything, whatever you believe in, there's value in that. Humans need this type of psychological help and these concepts, and that we need this. And also that meeting often with the people in your community to talk about how to live is something valuable. Like the community of the church is something valuable and stuff like this. But I know a lot of people will not, maybe feel they don't need that. So there are a lot of people who will say, "Oh, that looks like crazy." So I don't know, but I don't take my children to church. I'm not a part of a church or anything, but I understand this concept of cultural Christianity, culturally religious. It's not about believing in God or not. It's just about the culture that you grew up in being important to you and having value.
Yes.
And you want to pass that on to your children, those cultural norms and those because they're not harmful, really. Some parts of it were maybe, some parts of it, I always go back to LGBTQ hatred or something. Some parts of it were terrible, but we can change the culture without throwing it away.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And you could become open to diversity, all forms of diversity, without throwing everything away. You can say this is one thing, but yeah. So, yeah. So that's really the interview. I don't know if you have anything else to say that you wanted to.
No, that pretty much, summed it up. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for interviewing. So you're in the group Women Against Feminism, right?